They haven't got a clue what to do. They could have got a handle on it, but the Prime Minister went on holiday. They could have acted faster and more convincingly, but it would probably have involved having to copy, for example, Germany. And could you imagine a government elected on the back of xenophobia and nonsense about German dominance in Europe having to say, well, the best thing we could possibly do at this moment is completely copy Germany? I mean, someone honest would have done it. Someone with integrity would have done it. Someone elected on truths and principles might have been able to do it, which kind of rules out this lot. So we find ourselves today learning from Boris Johnson last night that we were supposed to be going to work this morning, finding out from Dominic Raab an hour ago that actually that isn't supposed to kick in until Wednesday. You can meet one person from your household can meet one other person from another household in the park, but not in the garden. You can meet one parent, but not the other parent. You can hang out with them 2 meters apart, but not play golf with them. You can go back to work, but not go back to work. If you can work from home, then work from home, but don't get on public transport. It is absolutely staggering. And I don't believe that the reason is sinister. Well, unless you consider abject chaos, confusion and disingenuousness to be sinister. But it's not as sinister as a secret plan, is it? There is no secret plan. How do you know that? Well, because there is clearly no plan at all. I have no idea how hard you would have to be tugging your forelock this morning to pretend that what has been presented to the country is anything other than catastrophic. It's as if having gone all in on a pair of twos, that the government have decided to borrow money and double down on their bet, despite the fact that a pair of twos is, well, not even a pair of twos. I can't remember what the poker phrase is for having absolutely nothing in your hand. But it's as if they're doubling down on an already disastrous situation. So, a couple of platitudes for you, I suppose. Just because they got it wrong yesterday doesn't mean they'll get it wrong tomorrow. But tomorrow is Tuesday. And Dominic Raab has already revealed that actually the things that were supposed to happen today are going to happen on Wednesday. And what are the things that are going to happen today? Do you even know what you're allowed to do? If my daughter wants to meet with a friend, does she become the one person from our household who can meet with one person from another household? And do they have to stay 2 meters apart from each other? And what if while they're 2 meters apart from each other, someone from another household who they happen to know walks past? So there are now 3 people from 3 different households, all 2 meters apart from each other, but one of them is somehow breaking the rules. Which one? Yeah, you're beginning to see the problem, I think. Unless, of course, you can tug that forelock so hard that reality has ceased to be a thing that you are capable of recognising. And then we come to what I have to describe as the class element of it. Again, I think this is probably either unintentional or inevitable, but it's certainly something that won't be keeping Boris Johnson awake at night. The pain of what is to come, both mental and potentially medical, will be felt much more keenly by people who work in facilities, by people who cannot work from home, by people who are, in other words, not remotely clerical or white collar. You know, it's as if a cleaner has to go and clean a building, but the manager who's in charge of doing the shifts can do his spreadsheets on his laptop at home, or her laptop at home. And again, I don't think that's intentional, and it's probably inevitable, but it's pretty grim, right? It's pretty grim. Public transport already going to be full of people who feel they have no choice but to go back to work. I am obviously a very privileged middle-class man, but I have, believe it or not, done some normal jobs I would loosely describe as normal. I won't wax lyrical about the 2 weeks I spent on a building site in Doncaster many, many moons ago, but I would remind you I've worked in shops. I would still be working in shops now if the career fairy hadn't waved her magic wand and somehow got my foot in the door of the media. I love working in shops. I've worked in bars, I've worked in restaurants. And you know and I know what that can be like. You know that telling people that they can still exercise a degree of discretion over whether they go back to work or not. As soon as this furlough legislation either lifts or loosens, you know what it's like to have a boss who's a git. We all do, right? I used to work for a fella. Oh, man. Just in a normal high street retail shop, but he thought he was Genghis Khan. He thought he was running ICI. He used to make me get a letter off the station master at Worcester Foregate Street Station if I was going to be late for work because the trains were delayed. And the station master didn't get into work sometimes until half an hour after I was supposed to be at my work. So rather than turn up at work and just believe that I was late because the train had been delayed, I used to end up being an hour later than I would have been anyway because I was waiting for the station master at the station to provide provide me with a letter to show to my manager to prove that I wasn't lying about the train being delayed. And you've worked for someone like that as well. You probably still do. What are they going to do today? Oh, that's fine. Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Mary. You stay at home until you feel a little bit safer. What's that? You're shielding a relative? Oh, okay. Well, you're not going to get paid this month. You can jog on for that. And then, of course, people like me can sit at home, even if I didn't do this for a living. I could be sitting at home tapping away on my £1,000 computer, happily submitting work from several miles away from what is ordinarily my office. And that is where we are now. There's this sense, isn't there, that it's somehow going to end, and at the end of it we'll be able to look around and decide who's had a good game and who's had a bad game. The point is that without clarity and leadership, it never ends. It never ends until the vaccine is available, and the vaccine doesn't look like being available anytime soon.
So James is asking whether it's evil and by design, or if it's haphazard and chaotic. And I think that we have to look at it from another angle. The problem is, in number 10, you have the scientists who are giving advice to the politicians, and the politicians who have to act on that advice. Now, the problem is, and I see this, and I think this is what's probably happening, is the scientists are making a list of recommendations, and the politicians are cherry-picking what they believe is politically acceptable for society. Well, not so much for society, but for them personally, in the sense what they can get away with. So, for example, the politicians may be told by the scientists, look, you need to lock down. You need a complete lockdown. The politicians say, okay, well, we're not going to do that because that would be extremely damaging to us as politicians. What can we do instead? The scientists said, well, okay, then if you're not going to do a full lockdown, do a partial lockdown. So the politicians implement a partial lockdown. Then the scientists tell the politicians, now you need to implement mask wearing, PPE in hospitals. We need sanitization taking place in public transportation, in public places, in businesses. And the politicians respond, okay, well, we can't enforce this. We can't ask businesses to implement this. So we'll ask them to implement some of these. So gradually you get to a point where you get closer to what the scientists have originally requested. So you get closer to a full lockdown. You get closer to a point where the politicians have been told at the original point to enforce mask wearing, gloves, sanitizing work desks, limiting freedom of movement within the country, within regions, for example. You eventually get to that point, but the politicians, every step before that point, will attempt to avoid the advice that they know they need to implement. I don't see it as a means to defend public health. I see it as a means to defend the politicians themselves from the wrath of the public. Because if things go wrong, the politicians will get the blame. The politicians will blame someone else, of course, but the first port of call will be the politicians themselves. And it's very easy for the politicians to throw someone else under the bus, even one of their own. And it is looking more and more likely that if things start to go badly, if the opening up of British society, loosening the lockdown, causes the numbers to spike again, I think someone like Matt Hancock will be thrown under a bus by Boris Johnson. And then eventually Boris Johnson will be thrown under a bus by the Conservative Party. He'll be replaced and someone else will take his place. And you will have a new Prime Minister with new ideas, avoiding the science, but at the same time telling the public that he or she is listening to the science. And you're going to go through this rigmarole again, where you're going to have lockdowns, followed by easing, followed by lockdown. And as James has said, we're not going to be able to get out of this until you have a vaccine. We're going to see partial openings and then partial lockdowns, partial openings, partial lockdowns. And this is going to continue, unfortunately. It's going to be extremely damaging to society. It's going to erode trust in politicians and public services. And I think it's going to harm the economy also, which is going to have a knock-on effect on people's lives. But that's the way I see it going. So I think we're going to see more lockdowns and easings over the next year, and you're going to see a number of politicians thrown under a big red bus in order to save the party and save the government. Let me know in the comments, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun? If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.